Today's discussion is all about healing our gut naturally. And this is an important topic of discussion because the GI tract actually holds so many important things. So we're going to go through the GI tract and talk about how we can optimize it in a way so that we can actually create a backdoor to improving MS. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Susan Payrovi. I'm a integrative and functional medicine physician. My clinical practice is at Stanford University at the Center for Integrative Medicine, which is a wonderful clinic where we get to talk about the factors that actually enhance health. Whereas I think of all the other clinics as places where we go to combat disease. I, on the other hand, get to talk about something really wonderful. And I've really enjoyed this journey of learning this information myself. I myself was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis shortly after the birth of my first child. I think that was about 12 years ago now. And I personally have experienced the power of working on the gut by improving my lifestyle habits. I was not doing a great job with lifestyle habits, let me tell you, when this all happened. So I've had to find my new normal, and I've had to build habits just like everybody else. And I can tell you that it's not easy, but it does take time. And when we do it with a community, it sure does make it easier. And it helps you get to your goals faster. So I always say time is brain. And we want to preserve as much brain and spinal cord as possible. So if we can minimize demyelination and perhaps even engage in things that remyelinate, even though we don't have a lot of data in this area, I'm still interested in doing those things that may improve my nervous system and to calm my immune system down. So with that, I'm going to get started. So we're talking about MS and gut health, how to naturally heal your gut. So we're going to talk about non-pharmaceutical strategies. I'm actually going to challenge myself to not even bring in a lot of supplements because I think we can make a lot of progress talking about natural solutions, things that are available to us every day that are not expensive and end up actually giving us a lot of progress in the long run. So we'll talk about why gut health matters in MS, how we can remove damaging factors from the body, natural ways to improve gut health, and how to keep it that way. How do we maintain gut health long term? I'm mainly interested in long-term strategies. I don't like short fixes. I think that they're a waste of time, money, and effort. I am mainly interested in your long-term progress over the period of 3 to 6 months on to a few years and beyond that. Okay, so why does gut health matter in MS? Well, the GI tract is a giant interface with the outside world. So when you eat food, it has to go through the tube that starts at the mouth and ends at the anus. And what's in that tube is not technically inside your body, even though the tube is inside your body. So what's in that GI tract or the tube has to get broken down and digested and absorbed into the body. But that work happens across this lining of the GI tract. And because of all of its folds, it's a huge surface area. And one of the main actions of the GI tract is to digest food so that we can extract energy out of food so that we can move our bodies and perform our metabolic functions and use our brains to think and do all of the other intricate things that our body does without us even thinking about. There is a huge chunk of the immune system that sits right in the gut. Why is that? Well, again, because there's this giant interface of stuff coming in from the outside world trying to get into the body. The immune system is an important checkpoint to make sure that what enters is actually safe to enter. So you have this giant, vast portion of the immune system sitting right there, ready to act if something inappropriate enters. And the gut is a very dynamic place. Lots of important molecules are produced in the gut. So think about serotonin, which we think of as the happy molecule. It's actually how a lot of our conventional pharmaceutical antidepressants work. They increase serotonin levels. And a lot of serotonin, in fact, probably most of it, is produced in the gut. So you want your gut to be working and being able to produce these molecules so that you can have well-regulated mood, so that you don't feel anxious. Hopefully, you're not experiencing low mood and depression. And there's so many molecules that are produced there, but you may think of melatonin as being produced in the pineal gland near the brain, but actually a lot of melatonin is produced in the gut, and it performs many more functions than just orchestrating the onset of sleep. So the gut is an important place where a lot of important metabolic functions happen. So as you can see in this picture here, you've got the gut in the center, and it interfaces with our mental health. So mood, anxiety, and all of the molecules and communication that goes on between those two systems. The gut interfaces with our metabolic health. How does our mitochondria work? How do these two systems communicate with each other? Hormones come into play here. And it's an important connection as well, because these are all of the different reactions that make things tick in the background that we don't even have to think about. And of course, gut health is important for immune health. There's a lot of communication that happens between these two systems because they're so intertwined with each other. And these are not the only systems. Gut connects to skin and many, many other systems. So you may have heard of the gut-brain axis. So there is constant communication between the brain and the gut, and it's bidirectional. So the gut can send information up to the brain can send information down to the GI tract, and they share a lot of nerves between these two systems, and there's a lot of chemical messengers that are traded back and forth between these two systems. Then there's the gut microbiome. I mean, I love learning about the gut microbiome because it is fascinating, and it may be the key to so many of chronic diseases that are on the rise. So what you have in this picture here is your small intestines in the gray color folded up, and then you have your large intestine, also called the colon. You have the ascending, the transverse, the descending, and then beyond on out to the external world. So the gut microbiome actually lives in this area that's lit up in this picture. It lives in the large intestine. This is where the good guys live. And it's not just friendly bacteria, it's also viruses, protozoa, fungi, or yeast. And they actually play a really important role in our health. I find it shocking that throughout all of my medical education and residency training, I didn't even know what the word microbiome was. It wasn't until I went into integrative and functional medicine and started exploring things outside of my conventional medical education that I started learning about these really important things that are also in the body that just weren't discussed in medical education. This is changing, thankfully, because these microbes have evolved with us. We give them a free place to stay. We give them food by the foods that we eat. You know, they use our foods as a source of fuel for themselves to grow and thrive. And in return, they do a lot of functions for us that we don't know how to do for ourselves. One of these really important functions is that they educate our immune system. So from the time a baby is conceived and is growing inside the mother, it is receiving signals from the external world, from the mom, into its immune system, learning about what to attack and what to leave alone, when to create inflammation, and when to turn it off. And there's this really intricate process of education that has to happen so that the immune system can distinguish between what's dangerous and what's friendly. And it actually may be the key to how everything connects in the body. So, for example, when we study nutrition and we look at outcomes like improvements in MS fatigue, anxiety, depression, pain, it may actually be that the microbiome is the intermediary between what you eat and what your symptoms feel like, because the gut microbiome is constantly being shifted based on what forces, what conditions it's being subjected to. So it's a really important superorganism that lives within our body, and its job is to keep us healthy and to do the functions for us that we don't know how to do for ourselves. And so we've evolved with the gut microbiome over millions, thousands, millions of years. And we are actually far outnumbered by the gut microbiome. So for about every one human cell in your body, there's maybe 5 to 10 single-celled microbes or microorganisms living in your body. So rather than you walking around with a microbiome inside your large intestine, it may actually be this microbiome carrying you, the human, around with it, right? It's like a different perspective because we are far outnumbered by them. All right, so let's talk about leaky gut. This is also called hyperpermeable gut, and it's something that is making its way into conventional gastroenterology. There is definitely microscopic evidence that leaky gut happens. So in research, you can actually take a biopsy of an animal or even a human that may have leaky gut and look at it in the microscope, and you can actually see this condition that's being depicted here on the right. So here's what leaky gut is. Remember the tube I talked about that goes from the mouth to the anus? It's a long tube, food passes through, what needs to get digested and absorbed gets processed and enters the body, and everything else exits the tube at the other end. Any portion of your GI tract can get damaged for various reasons. For example, people who do chemotherapy can get a lot of sores in their mouth or the esophagus. You can get gastritis. You can get inflammatory bowel diseases in the large intestine. So you can get an itis, which means inflammation at really any level of the GI tract. Leaky gut happens in the small intestine, and it is affecting the cells lining the small intestine. And what happens is on the scenario on the left here, this is a normal scenario. Notice how all these cells are adhered to each other. There are proteins called zonulin that bring these cells together so that they're nice and tight and nothing can pass through them. These are called tight junctions, the closures, the areas where they adhere to each other. So if something wants to enter the body through the lumen of the GI tract, it has to bind one of these finger-like projections. It's going to feel out what's coming in. If it feels friendly, it'll pull it into the cell. So here's a cell right here. And then that's your first checkpoint to make sure whatever tried to enter was actually safe. So maybe it was a food molecule that needed to enter as a nutrient. That's your first level of safety to make sure it's safe to enter. The second level is this red line right here. Imagine the immune system sitting right here. Remember I said 70% of the immune system hangs out in the gut? Well, here it is sitting in this area called the lamina propria. And this is your second checkpoint to make sure that this thing, whatever the food or whatever it was that entered, is actually safe. So you have two levels of regulation. And if the immune system decides that it's seen this thing before and it's in fact safe, it will pull that thing into the blood. And once things get into the blood, they can get basically anywhere in the body because now they're in the highway of stuff moving throughout the body. Now, on this picture on the right, what you will see is that the cells are not so nicely touching each other. There's a gap here. And so if something wants to enter, it can actually leak between the cells. And now you've lost your first level of regulation, which was binding to these finger-like projections called villi. So now you've bypassed that. But the good thing is the immune system is sitting right here, and it's your second checkpoint. But imagine what's happening in this scenario where lots of things are sneaking through, leaking through. For example, maybe these are microbes like bacteria or viruses, or pollutants like man-made chemicals, and they're getting in between the cells. And here's the immune system. They are bombarding the immune system. So the immune system goes, wait, hold on. Why am I seeing so much stuff? This isn't normal. There's something wrong. I better rev up my defenses and turn on inflammation. Okay. Now, remember I said what can enter here and sneak by is microorganisms, man-made toxins, also partially digested foods, which may be a little too big to enter in this scenario. But here it can actually leak through. So we think this is how autoimmunity starts. We think this is how food sensitivities start. So if we're really looking at upstream causes of our problems with our immune system, this is an upstream cause. So you have leaky gut. There is this space, the immune system seeing a bunch of stuff it wasn't supposed to see. Sometimes that becomes a food sensitivity. Sometimes that becomes an autoimmune disease. And all of that leads to inflammation. Okay, so you can see how the beginnings of food sensitivities and autoimmune diseases can be very similar, right? And so our approach is to work upstream. Well, to do that would be to fix this leaky gut, close up those spaces so that the immune system isn't being bombarded by information. Okay, let's do a good review of the GI tract from top to bottom. I do remember in medical school thinking, what kind of doctor can I be where I don't have to learn the immune system? Because it's so complicated, right? And then I studied, we got to the GI section of our education. I go, okay, I like the GI system because it makes sense. It's orderly. I can understand what's happening at every section. So let's go through this together. Digestion actually starts where? In the brain. So when we are about to eat food and our brain realizes that, it starts coordinating digestion throughout the GI tract. So it may tell various parts of the GI tract to start turning on enzymes, acid, get the gut moving so that we can digest food. It's really important to have coordination. However, I know I'm guilty of inhaling food in an elevator, running from one thing to the next. There's really very little coordination there, where you just stuff food in, you mindlessly chew it, and then you hope that it gets digested. Okay, so just remember, it's always important to let the brain catch up. So you want to sit for a few minutes before you eat to let that coordination happen. So we put food in our mouths, we chew it with our teeth, the tongue moves everything around to make sure that saliva and those broken down pieces of food are mixing nicely. Saliva has enzymes that breaks food down. Once you've mashed your food down, hopefully to the point where it's unrecognizable in the mouth, where you don't know that this is a pea and that's a carrot, right? Hopefully you did a good mechanical digestion. You swallow your food through the esophagus, and food dumps into the stomach. And this is where we start putting out stomach acid to chemically break down food. And so it's really important that there's enough acid there. But I bet you can think of a few conditions where acid might be low, perhaps when we're taking acid blocking medications, because it is so uncomfortable to have acid reflux. So food may stay in the stomach 30 minutes, an hour to a couple hours, mixing and breaking down further. Then food moves into the first part of the small intestine, which we call the duodenum. And this is a really key area. This is where the pancreas shoots in digestive enzymes to break down fats, proteins, and carbs. It is also where the gallbladder that's storing bile squeezes and shoots out bile into the duodenum to help digest and absorb fats. So it's really important to have bile and digestive enzymes and stomach acid to do this really complex work of digesting food. Now, once you've made your way through the first part of the small intestine, you go to the second part, which is the jejunum. And then you make your way into the large intestine, which is the ascending part, the transverse part, and the descending part. And here is where the microbiome lives. I forgot to mention that it is in the small intestine where we absorb a lot of nutrients and water. The remainder of the water gets absorbed in the large intestine. And this is where you start forming solid stool. And hopefully 1 to 2 times a day, you're eliminating. It's really important to have constant forward movement in the GI tract. If we don't, we call that constipation, right? Okay, so let's step back. To create balance and healing in the body in functional medicine, we always say, give the body what it needs and remove what is damaging. And this is a very simple way of thinking about health, but I think it makes sense, right? You need to provide what's necessary and remove what's damaging or in excess. And that's how you start achieving balance. So for example, you may need to give your body more rest, more deeper restorative sleep, more nutrients, movement and exercise, joy, love, social interaction. And then you need to remove what is damaging. For example, stress, man-made toxins that get into the body and wreak havoc on our metabolic health. So that's a very simple way of formulating how we're going to move through this protocol. So what I'm going to talk to you about is the 5R protocol. I didn't make it up, but it's something I use all the time when I'm working with my patients at Stanford or when I'm working with our participants in Truemedicine. There are 5 R's, and here are the steps. So number 1, remove. Remove the things that are damaging to the body. Remember, it was that picture of the green hills that I showed you. Remove what is in excess or damaging to the body. Number 2, replace what is necessary for the gut to do its job. Now remember, I said you needed stomach acid, digestive enzymes, bile, etc. So give back the body what it is lacking and what it needs. Reinoculate is the 3rd R, and this is a fancy laboratory term that refers to the growth of bacteria. This is talking about nurturing your gut microbiome in the large intestine. So getting those microbes to start thriving and outcompeting the not so friendly bugs. The 4th R is repair. This is the repair of those tight junctions that bring the cells together in the small intestine where leaky gut happens. So it's the repair of leaky gut. It's also the repair of the tissues along other segments of the GI tract. And number 5 is rebalance. This is how you keep your gut in balance once you've done the first 4 R's. And this is really the rebalancing of your life, which might actually be the most complex of the R's, but I'd say in many ways the most important, because you can do the first 4 R's, but if your life is still out of balance, it is not going to get you far with gut health. You'll just end up right back where you were. Okay, so let's go into the 5 R's in greater depth. The first R was remove, and the 2 categories of things I like to think about removing are infections and food sensitivities. So infections by viruses, bacteria, etc., can definitely create a hostile environment in the intestinal tract. It can cause inflammation and leaky gut. So if you have a travel history, you went on a trip, you got diarrhea, you came back and you were never the same, you would be somebody I would check a stool test on just to see what's going on in your gut. But without that history, I generally don't go searching for bugs in the stool because it's not very high yielding. You know, people who have GI infections tend to have symptoms. They're not off, these infections are not often silent. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have certain bugs or parasites that are problematic, but not so problematic that you're ill. You know, they could go unnoticed, but it's actually not that common. So it's not high yielding. What is high yielding is looking for food sensitivities. And these are often the foods that we're eating most of the time, regularly, every day in our diets. So imagine if you have a leaky gut. Remember the picture I showed you where there were spaces between the cells, and food that you're eating all the time is leaking in and it's bombarding the immune system. Well, it's the foods that you eat most likely that have the biggest access to your immune system, and they're the most likely foods to turn into food sensitivities. Our immune system can learn to make IgG antibodies to these food sensitivities, and so we start attacking these foods. And here are some of the most common ones: gluten, right? Eggs, sugar, dairy, soy, among many other foods. For people who live with autoimmunity, there's actually a higher rate of food sensitivities because remember, I said they kind of have similar beginnings with leaky gut. So if you have MS or other autoimmune condition, I highly recommend thinking about food sensitivities because they're probably lurking, in the background. And by the way, I said these were IgG antibodies. These are different than anaphylactic reactions, which are a different class of antibodies. Those are IgE antibodies. Those are fast acting and severe. Anaphylactic reactions are life-threatening. Food sensitivity reactions are not. They're subtle, they're slow to come on, they're slow to go away, and the symptoms are kind of vague. So it's really hard to make the connection that you ate gluten today, but 2 days later, you started, getting a reaction on your skin or mood or balance. Gluten can do very strange things, actually. It seems to be a molecule that our immune system likes to make antibodies to. So when it comes to remove, we talk about food sensitivities as the high yielding step. How do you deal with food sensitivities? Well, you may have heard of an elimination diet. And the way that works is it's 2 phases. The first phase is removing the foods. Remember, remove what's damaging to the body. So you're going to choose what foods to remove. And here's a list that you may choose off of. Certainly, it's not limited to this list. And you stay off these foods for 6 weeks, ideally, minimum of 3, maximum of 6 weeks. What happens during this time is if you were indeed making antibodies to foods, you are going to stop making antibodies because there's no more food coming in. And this allows the immune system to cool down. This allows the GI tract to cool down. And so even though the first 3 weeks might be challenging, weeks 4, 5, and 6, people start feeling really good and make a lot of progress. The second phase of this is the reintroduction, which is something a lot of other diets skip, like, for example, the Whole30 or some of the other ones, AIP. They don't do this very methodical reintroduction, but it's an important step to do because the elimination phase was to allow things to cool off. The reintroduction phase is to challenge the immune system by picking one of the eliminated foods, eating it multiple times throughout 3 days, and looking for symptoms. And the symptoms can be far beyond the GI tract. Could be gastrointestinal, but it could be changes in skin, sleep, mood, changes in MS symptoms. So you have to really kind of do this in a methodical way. It's not an easy thing to carry out on your own, especially if you're doing multiple foods. There's a lot of subtleties in carrying out an elimination diet. And that's why I've put together a gut restoration protocol through Truemedicine to help people with this, because it's challenging. And I've done this many, many times, but it takes practice to get comfortable with it. But I find it to be very high yielding and very much a game changer when it comes to finding your relationship with foods and deciding what works for you and what doesn't. Okay, the second R is replace. So we're going to give back the gut what it needs. And because the topic of today is talking about how to heal your gut naturally, I'm going to stick to food. Certainly there are many supplements and I will mention them, but that's not really the focus of what we're going to discuss today. So starting from the top, stomach acid. we want to make sure that you have enough stomach acid. So if you are on acid blockers, it might be an important conversation to have with your doctor of, how long am I supposed to be on this? Is this forever? Can we try weaning down to see what happens? Now, there are some scenarios where you should be on acid blockers long-term because of, ongoing damage because of too much acid, but I leave that to you and your doctor. However, here are some foods that can help with supporting stomach acid to make sure that food is being optimally digested. So think fermented foods. Any fermented vegetable, kimchi, sauerkraut, fermented dairy, if you are able to tolerate dairy, kombucha, which is fermented tea. Also, bitter foods like arugula, dandelion greens. You see this stuff growing everywhere. So anything bitter can actually help support stomach acid, as can some of the foods down here, like apple cider vinegar, etc. Now, moving down, how do we support pancreatic enzymes? Well, enzymes can get low due to aging, due to toxins that may have damaged the pancreas, due to nutritional deficiencies where you just can't make the enzymes. So you can actually supplement with foods that work very similarly to your pancreatic enzymes. And your pancreas isn't that smart. Like, it can't tell that you're eating all these foods where it's going to say, now let me make less enzymes. It's just going to keep doing what it wants to do. And you can add in these foods that, to help further boost and support digestion and breaking food down. So fermented foods, like any fermented vegetables, kombucha, fermented dairy, as I mentioned. And then here's a whole host of other foods. And one thing they sort of have in common is that they're colored yellow. Not all of them, but many of them are. Yellow foods tend to have this enzymatic activity. So start trying to include them into your diet. So maybe have them at the beginning of your meal or at the end of your meal to further boost digestion. And then remember, I said that bile is also important. Bile is stored in the gallbladder, and then it is released when food is passing through the first part of the small intestine. So foods that are bitter are actually really good at helping us make more bile and to secrete bile. So some of these foods actually are delicious. Arugula, like in a lot of these leafy green vegetables, radishes. So if you look at this list and there's many foods that you're not currently eating, start thinking about bringing them into your diet. Now, let me quickly go through where some supplements can be helpful here, but this is something you need to discuss with your healthcare providers who know your health history. They know your medical conditions, as well as your medications and supplements. But there's a supplement called betaine hydrochloride that can be a boost to stomach acid. However, if you've ever had an ulcer, I wouldn't want you to use that. You can blow a hole out through your stomach. But studies do show that betaine hydrochloride can boost digestion by raising stomach acid. You can find digestive enzymes on the market. There's one that you can get on by prescription called Creon to further help digest food. We use it in conditions where people have pancreatic insufficiency, but you can also find digestive enzymes on the market and use them. I like the plant-based ones. They tend to be more broad spectrum. But again, you want to be careful when you start loading up on supplements. And finally, bile salts or bile acids are available, especially for people who may lose a lot of bile salts, maybe because they've had their gallbladder removed or they have gallbladder disease. So while these supplements do exist on the market, I don't always feel like that's where we need to start. We can actually make so much progress with food, and food has the additional benefit of providing you with nutrients. So it's just a win-win situation. It's much more cost effective, and it'll just nourish you at the cellular level. Okay, so the third R is reinoculate, and this is bringing back the good bugs. So think about your microbiome. How do we support the microbiome? Well, think of the microbiome as a place where lots of microbes coexist. They are competing for space with each other. They are competing with nutrients. And if we can create the environment that promotes the growth of the friendly bugs, then we allow those bugs to grow and thrive, making it harder for the more problematic bugs to grow and thrive. So in a way, you're inducing biological warfare in your large intestine in a very controlled manner. But what's really amazing is that you can shift what is growing in your microbiome over the course of 1.5 to 3 days of just changing your diet. That's how dynamic the gut and the microbiome are. So I will talk about probiotics in a second, but I purposely want to talk about prebiotics first, because these foods don't get a lot of love from the nutraceutical company. Yes, there are, supplements that are prebiotics, but they're basically fiber. Prebiotics are the foods we eat that contain the right type of fiber that our good bacteria can use to grow and thrive. And here's just a list of foods that have prebiotics in them. So, and you're probably eating many of these: garlic, onion, bananas, kiwis, right? Green leafy vegetables. It is really important to have these in your diet every day and to not just stick to the same 2 prebiotics, because the more diverse the prebiotic foods in your diet, the more nutrients there are for your gut microbiome and the more diverse they will become. Diversity is the name of the game. Really, really important. This is why I want you to focus on eating lots of different foods throughout the week, lots of different prebiotics, and lots of different probiotics. Now, probiotics may make you think about little capsules with designer bacteria in them, but they are also fermented foods that contain the good bacteria in them. So getting at least a few different probiotics into your diet regularly is really important. Don't just stick to kombucha because you love it. Make sure that you pick up some fermented vegetables and some of the other foods from this list. The more different types of probiotics in your diet, the more diversity in your microbiome. Okay. And one thing is, people always ask, can I go get my microbiome tested? I want to know what bugs are growing. Yes, there are tests for that. However, I don't use them. I don't find that they're that helpful because we're not at the point where we've really learned which bugs are helpful and which ones are not. In fact, it may not actually be the strains of bacteria that's the most telling. It's the overall metabolic activity of the microbiome that may ultimately be the most important thing, right? Because we all grew up in different parts of the world, maybe. So we come with a different core microbiome. And certainly there isn't one core microbiome that is right. So it has a lot to do with what our body, what our genes and our microbiome has been adapted to. So getting prebiotics and probiotics into your diet is really important. I just recommend getting them as foods. You can buy a fiber supplement that's a prebiotic supplement, but it's not going to be as chemically diverse as getting it from many different prebiotic foods. And yes, you can do a trial of probiotic supplements. They're about $1 a day, so I don't consider that cheap. And you're only getting the bugs that are in the capsule rather than the larger variety from foods. So, and when you look at probiotic supplements, they're dosed in CFUs, colony forming units, and the numbers are in the billions. So a pediatric dose would be 5 billion. An adult dose would be maybe 30 billion colony forming units. Sometimes I think it is appropriate to use probiotics as supplements when there's a disease flare, there's a lot of inflammation, but I just don't think it's the long-term strategy. Food first, lifestyle first is always going to be my approach because that's what I've actually seen work for most people. Okay, so the fourth R is the repair of leaky gut. So we want the picture on the right to look like the picture on the left. And what's amazing is even though the gut can get damaged on the order of a few days to weeks, it can also actually get repaired on the order of, a few weeks to a few months. It doesn't take years. So how do we do repair? We need nutrients. So this is why you want to be eating a diet that's diverse, lots of plant-based foods. You want to make sure vitamin D is adequate. So this is really important for MS anyways, but it also helps pull those cells back together. So for most people, a vitamin D level of about 50 in blood is a good target, but you will need to ask your doctor what's right for you. People who have bone density, osteoporosis, osteopenia, I err on the side of not making their vitamin D levels super high. That can lead to some maybe accelerated bone loss. But these are things to talk about with your doctors to make sure that you're proceeding safely. Omega-3s, such as from fish oil, also from algae for people who are vegetarian or don't want to do a fish source, can help pull these nutrient cells back together. And a few other things that can be helpful are supplements. So for example, there's data that L-glutamine can help, again, repair. But L-glutamine is a supplement, and the food version of that is bone broth. So either from beef or chicken, you can even make magic mineral broth. There are recipes online. And then zinc carnosine is another, there's a lot of data that zinc carnosine, in addition to L-glutamine, can help, but there's a lot of foods that can also help that have zinc. A lot of plant-based foods like, green leafy vegetables, nuts, seeds can be helpful. So again, eating a plant-based diet helps a lot. Okay, so the fifth R is the rebalancing of your life. So how do we rebalance our life so that our gut stays in balance? We got to eat clean. There's no way around this. Just remember, all of the things in your environment send information deep into your cells and DNA and tell your genes to turn on and off. So information like, whether you're eating a salad or you're eating a processed hamburger, for example, it will send a different set of information into your DNA to turn on certain genes. So eating a plant-based diet that's rich in vegetables and fruits, but also nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, herbs, spices is really helpful. It'll go a long way. So if you can get to 80% of your diet being from plants, that's a big win. Managing stress to the extent possible. And I always talk to people about letting go of things that are that you can let go of that are stressful. And then for whatever's left over, you start putting into practice different mindfulness techniques. Maybe it's even a hobby or exercise or going for a walk or cuddling up with your pet, but we've got to find ways to better manage stress. Moving and exercising is also really powerful. It helps us maintain our gut microbiome. It helps with repairing leaky gut. I know those things may seem unrelated, but all of these lifestyle habits actually do support the gut. And minimizing exposures to man-made toxins. And this might be the one thing that our doctors aren't really talking to us about because it's not part of conventional medicine. So thinking about exposures through air and water, why we should have filters to filter and clean our air and water in our home. Eating organic food as much as possible, using non-toxic cleaning products and personal care products are really important because if you're putting less toxins in, the liver has less stuff to deal with, and that goes a long way in balancing your metabolic health. And finally, restorative sleep. Really committing to getting 8 to 9 hours a night of sleep, hopefully in one chunk, but even if it's in 2 chunks, it's better than nothing. Allowing your body to have this opportunity to rest and repair and regenerate and do all of these important things that you can't do during daytime because daytime physiology is very different than nighttime physiology. Okay, so how do I do all of this? This seems like a lot. And if it seems like that to you, you're not alone. It is a big protocol. It is not easy to navigate on your own. I have been working with patients at Stanford and through Truemedicine in getting people, through these different tips and tricks over time. And it doesn't take that long to make progress, but it does take support to be able to go through the 5 R's in a way that isn't overwhelming and in a way where you can be successful.